fabulous to have you with us on this Monday. Dave Revson, Trey Demps, action-packed weekend. Every team in action once again, and lots to talk about.
I know. I mean, the biggest thing you just mentioned is the parity. I mean, you got 6 teams right now sitting at 7-5. It could have easily been 8, but obviously the most important one, I had to rock my purple tie, was the Northwestern Wildcats. We are back after losing 2 in a row. I shouldn't say we. I know I'm an analyst. I apologize for that.
Somehow we have relegated Northwestern to the second block, but we will get to them, trust me, as we look at a big story, the weekend that was. The biggest news is number 1 Purdue going down in Bloomington, just the second loss of the year for the Boilermakers. Rutgers a winner over Michigan State at the Garden. Illinois falling to Iowa. The Hawkeyes got 32 from Tony Perkins in a narrow home win. Northwestern does finish off that sweep of Wisconsin. And Michigan starting to show some signs of life as well after winning at Ohio State. Let's start with Saturday, though, and Indiana, certainly the biggest news of the weekend as they knocked off Purdue. The Boilermakers came in number 1. Will be interesting to see where they are in this week's rankings. The centers, to me, kind of canceled each other out, Trey. They both played really well, Zach Edey and Trace Jackson-Davis. Felt to me like Indiana's guards were the guys who won them the game.
Yeah, and they got it done on both ends of the floor. And I really liked what Indiana did on the offensive end, especially in that first half, and how they attacked Purdue, because they put a guy in the dunker spot. A lot of times when you run pick and roll actions, you have 3 spread around, and then you run the pick and roll action where you have the 2 guys playing in the pick and roll action. But what Indiana did is they put somebody kind of in the dunker spot underneath the basket, and what that forces a team like Purdue have to do is to play 2-on-2 in pick and roll situations, and that's what they kind of ran continuously throughout the course of that first half. And I love the balance that they had offensively. Indiana, they threw the ball into the post to TJD. Purdue would double. TJD did a really good job of finding shooters and being able to be aggressive and create his own shot. And then they ran that pick and roll action where the guards were able to kind of get off and be able to create on their own. But I think you mentioned it. It's the defensive end really where Indiana won this game. And the fact that they were able to force Purdue, a team that has really good guard play, 11 turnovers in the first half. And it really just seemed like Purdue's offense was out of sorts. And they did a really good job of just pressuring the basketball, really making Purdue's guards feel uncomfortable, which is kind of the first time that we've seen that all year, where the Purdue offense was out of sorts. They were unable to kind of get into those sets. So it was a really good job by the guards. TJD obviously is an All-American, but I really felt like Indiana's guards won the game.
Yeah, I thought so too. Again, they really defended well, to your point. But I mean, you go 1.4 points per possession in the first half against Purdue. You are doing something right, because this Purdue team, as we've talked about all year, I mean, they'll guard you. Right. Indiana, in that first half, I mean, man, they had it rolling on the offensive end, Trey.
Yeah, and that goes back to that kind of the situation where when a guard is able to come off and have that much space in pick and roll situations, when you have that guy in the dunker, you have your 2 shooters in the corner, it limits what the help side can do in those pick and roll situations. And then you can also hit TJD or Renew in that kind of short roll area at the free throw line and let them operate. And they kind of started to do that a little bit against Maryland towards the end of the game in the second half. So I really like the adjustment that Coach Woodson has made, kind of running that action, but also just creating turnovers and able to get 12 points off of turnovers in that first half, being able to kind of get out in transition, get the crowd into the game, to generate some excitement. I thought that was the biggest key as well.
16 turnovers in the game for Purdue, just 8 for Indiana. I was impressed with the toughness, too, that Indiana showed down the stretch. You know Purdue's going to make some runs at you. They absolutely did. They got down to 1 point, and Indiana held them off. What do you make of it from Purdue's perspective? I mean, I don't think any of us sat here and said Purdue was going to go through and not lose again. But we've seen kind of the highs and lows of them, for a lack of a better way of putting it, in the last week. I mean, they, obviously were fabulous earlier in the week, and then in this game, maybe showed off a few places where they can be had. Is this just a function of running into your arch rival on the road, fever pitch crowd, or is there something more to it that concerns you with the Boilers?
I think there's something more, but I will say before I get into that I really like that they're going through a little bit of adversity here. And even if they were to lose another game, I don't think that it would necessarily be bad for this Boilermakers team, because I think it generates a lot of pressure when you go into the Big Ten tournament, the NCAA tournament, going on like a 14, 15 game winning streak. So I really like the fact that they're kind of having to go through some adversity, make some adjustments, But I really think the biggest thing, and it kind of goes back to last year a little bit too, that sometimes I wonder about Purdue, is their ability to kind of play random, right? Because you don't talk about Matt Painter and his ability to run all these sets and all these different plays. At certain points of a game, you have to be able to break a play. You have to be able to say, okay, they're pressuring so much on these particular actions that we're running that I have to just have a quick sweep through and get to the basket and be able to create some offense, right? Because I think sometimes when you have a coach that is such a genius like Matt Painter is, that runs all these intricate plays, that's able to get his guys open, sometimes as a player I think you can rely heavily upon that. And I would like to see Purdue sometimes in certain situations, because you can't do it all the time, and that's what makes Matt Painter great, obviously, right? It's his ability to get guys open, to find Zach Edey, and not allow teams to double team him, get the guards open, Fletcher Lawyer. But at certain points of the game, right, especially in the big crucial games, games where there's a lot on the line, I think you have to be able to break the play, be able to attack pressure, be able to kind of take some gambles and some risk on the offensive end.
Interesting. 9-2 still against Quad 1. They're one of only 2 teams in the country with 9 Quad 1 wins. Kansas is the other one. They have 5 Quad 1 losses. So this is not damaging to the resume in any real sort of way, but it is interesting to point out, as you have, some perhaps issues is strong, but maybe some minor concerns, some things that Purdue needs to tweak before they take on Iowa at home on Thursday. How about Rutgers? Man, tremendous second half to knock off Michigan State at the Garden. Paul Mulcahy was just fabulous down the stretch, got himself to the free throw line. The crowd, I thought, was really good behind Rutgers. You can see the excitement that this program has generated, not just in New Jersey, but in the entire New York metropolitan area, and just a really good win for them.
Yeah, and it was a defensive-minded game. I mean, both teams started out a combined 4 from 24 from the field. I mean, that's just kind of unheard of, but I mean, that's how Rutgers wins games. They get it done on the defensive end, and I really thought that at the end of the day, in that second half, when Rutgers kind of went to that 3-2 zone, because Michigan State started to pull away a little bit. They were up 8 to start that second half. When they went to that 3-2 zone, it kind of put Michigan State out of sorts a little bit on the offensive end. And going back to what we talked about last week, too, with Michigan State, I really think it's kind of become a kind of a bigger issue, just the ability to kind of help your bigs out in the post. And I noticed it again, where they're not pressuring the basketball, and teams are able to kind of throw the ball into the post kind of at will and at ease, and be able to kind of run their offense fluidly. When you talk about a Tom Izzo coach team, you talk about toughness, physicality, pressuring the basketball. And I don't see this quite with this Michigan State team, because teams are able to kind of run their offenses. There's not a lot of denials. And then what happens is you're able to just kind of throw the ball in and play in sync offensively if you're an opposing team. And Cliff Amore kind of had the advantage down low in the interior against Michigan State's big. So I think that's a big concern for me, and I think something that Tom Izzo has to address for this Michigan State team. Interesting.
From Rutgers' point of view, it's all about defense, right? I mean, you win a game, you shoot under 40% from the field. You shoot under 20% from 3. You shoot under 70% from the line. Still win the game. It's the first time they've done that as a Big Ten member. It speaks to how good their defense is. They've got a really challenging week ahead. They've got the game against Indiana tomorrow here on Big Ten Network. We'll talk a little bit about that one. They go to Illinois as well. Michigan State, I mean, you touched on it. It feels to me, you were talking about the issues on the defensive end. I watch them on offense, and sometimes now Rutgers will do this to you.
Right.
But it feels sometimes like the flow offensively just isn't quite there, and I can't put a finger on what that is. What do you see on that end of the court?
Well, I think they're playing with a much slower pace than we see with a traditional Tom Izzo coach team. And I think especially in a game like Rutgers, right, where they're so good in the half court, they're so disruptive, I would have liked to see them play with a little bit more pace. And even we talked about that 4 for 24 number to start the game, both teams combined. 2 or 3 of those field goals from Michigan State in that first half during that stretch were in transition situations where they're able to get out, play against a non-set defense. I would kind of like to see this Michigan State team be a little bit more opportunistic in pushing the pace and being able to create and generate some offense, some drag screens for A.J. Hoggard, getting Tyson Walker kind of in transition, playing in space, because in the Big Ten, it could be so challenging, especially when you have undersized guards and bigs that don't have as much experience playing with it in the low post, to play in the half court all the time. So I would like to see them be a little bit more opportunistic in transition.
Spartans fall to 9th place in the Big Ten right now. It's crazy to see. Now, they have a manageable schedule down the stretch. I'd be very surprised if they finish in ninth place, but still pretty. Again, it speaks to how good the league is because it's a pretty good team. But really fascinating to see that. How about Iowa? They sweep a 3-game homestand. They beat Illinois by 2, and man, when the Hawkeyes are clicking, they are really good offensively.
Yeah, and I thought the biggest thing is what Brad Underwood has changed kind of in the course in the middle of the season. They no longer switch 1 through 4 or 1 through 5 when Coleman Hawkins is playing the 5. And I think that can be such a challenge when you're playing an Iowa team that cuts so well, moves without the basketball. They kind of run that motion offense where it's never-ending movement. I thought that was the biggest key. I was able to kind of get whatever they wanted within the flow of that movement. But, I mean, you can't talk about this game without talking about Tony Perkins.
It's phenomenal.
I mean, you see guys like Bryce Sensabaugh, Jet Howard, they get a cute, pretty 30 points. Like, this was a tough, rigid 30-point ball game. I mean, 16 free throws. I mean, nothing came easy. And I love the fact that Tony Perkins, even though he struggled over the last, the 4 or 5 games, he's gotten to the free throw line 22 times in the previous 5 games. So it's kind of been a habit for him to get himself going offensively. And it's only a matter of time as a scorer and as a guy that has as much confidence as Tony Perkins. You see one go in, now a bunch start to go in. I love the fact, too, that he was getting to that mid-range game because teams are really starting to go under on his pick and rolls as well. And so his ability to kind of get to that mid-range game and create and be able to be gritty and tough and get some offensive rebounds, get to the paint, draw fouls, I thought was the difference maker for this game.
I want to get back to what you were saying about Illinois on the defensive end because it was interesting in talking to Brad Underwood. I had their game against Nebraska last week, and he was saying that not switching on defense had made them more accountable on the defensive end. And he really felt like that was a big key for them. Mm-hmm. But what you're pointing out is the downside, right? That if someone runs really good offense, it can just be hard to keep up with them.
Yeah, I think when teams run more sets, right, where you kind of run your traditional sets where you're trying to get one person open on a particular play, it's really important to kind of have those foundational principles and not switch. But I think when a team like Iowa, and I remember having to guard Fran McCaffrey coach teams, if you don't switch, how many screens that you have to get through on a given possession can be so challenging to guard. But at the end of the day, I do kind of like the call that Brad Underwood has made because it's kind of setting the tone and the identity. Even if you lose a game, you give up 81 points, and you let a team kind of have a strong offensive performance, it still lays that foundation. We're not changing. We're going to be a tough, rigid team. We're going to fight through screens. We're not going to be lazy and just point switch in different possessions. Right. So I like the fact that Illinois stuck to that.
He used the word accountability. Mm-hmm. Just kind of, hey, you got to guard your man.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, Iowa does this to a lot of people. They're second in the nation now in offensive efficiency. They've won 7 of their last 9. As I mentioned, they go to Purdue this week. On the offensive end for Illinois, does it still feel like they're taking too many threes to you, or is that just kind of my perception? I felt like in the Nebraska game they did. Here they took 55 field goal attempts, 22 of them are threes. They're just not a great three-point shooting team. Now, Meyer was fabulous, right? I mean, Meyer is a gunner,
right.
But it just feels like some of the others fall into that a little bit.
I think it might be a little bit of the fact that this Illinois team doesn't really have a true point guard. When you talk about Jaden Epps, I mean, coming into this program and what he was in high school, he was a scorer. Right. He was a 2-guard. He was a bucket getter. And now all of a sudden he's playing 30 minutes without Sky Clark at the point guard position. I think what's really telling of a stat from the Iowa game is the fact that in the second half, when Iowa really started to pick up that pressure, Matthew Meyer and Terrence Shannon Jr. only got 9 shot attempts combined in the second half. They went 3 of 9 combined. And I think when you have a true point guard, a guy that is thinking, not that Jaden Epps is a selfish player by any stretch of the imagination, but he has a scorer's mentality. Similar, I had a scorer's mentality. I'm thinking about how can I get how can I help the team with scoring the basketball. But when you have a true point guard on the floor, you're thinking about those things. Okay, Terrence Shannon Jr. hasn't gotten a shot. I got to get him a look. Matthew Meyer had a great first half. He hasn't gotten a shot in 7-8 minutes. So I got to figure out a way. I got to call a set that gets him involved. And I think that's kind of been a little bit of why with the shot selection at times has been questionable, because now all of a sudden, you get the ball, you don't have a set run for you, you're kind of in scramble mode offensively, you're kind of forced to kind of take that tough contested three. So I think that not having a true point guard has kind of been one of the things that's really kind of challenged this Illinois offense.
Interesting. A team that saw its 3-game winning streak come to an end. Yesterday, Michigan knocks off rival Ohio State in their only regular season meeting, taking it by 8, double-double for Hunter Dickinson. Michigan started to make a little noise. They've won 2 straight since getting blown out at Penn State last weekend. And back here with Trey Demps, really rode Hunter Dickinson in this one, but Jet Howard, Kobe Buffkin, you're starting to see maybe this 3-headed monster emerge a little bit.
And they're getting it done by playing with outstanding pace. I think that was the biggest difference, especially in that first half, is the pace that they played with. Because Juwan Howard, I think better maybe than any coach in the Big Ten, has so many quick hitters that he can run in transition situations. He has a lot of different wrinkles that he can run in ball screen situations to get Jet Howard in movement, a lot of seal post-up situations, early post-ups for Hunter Dickinson. Because I think when I look at this Michigan team, because those 3 guys are the main guys and the guys that they're going to go to in every possession, I think it's hard to play in the half court. So you have to get them out in movement against a non-set defense where the scouting can't be set up to kind of stop some of their half-court offenses. So I think that was the biggest key. And then obviously, I think the paint was the biggest key as well. I thought Michigan did a really good job playing inside out. Ohio State likes to hard hedge on a lot of different ball screens, and I thought Michigan did a really good job with their spacing, getting the ball into Hunter Dickinson. Hunter Dickinson was able to find shooters. The guards were doing a really good job of attacking closeout. And I think Ohio State, kind of the same story, right? Just, you have 5 assists on the game, or 6 assists on the game, 5 3-point field goals. It's just kind of the same story, and just in terms of being kind of perimeter-oriented, isolation basketball. I think that could be really easy to guard. I think the biggest key for them is just trying to get out in transition and create some easy opportunities, just like Michigan did in this game.
Seemed like Zed Key's shoulder was bothering him too, and that I do think it's fair to mention, been banged up, and he's a huge part of what they do, but they've lost 9 of their last 10. Michigan, you look at this, I've been saying this all along, I don't think you can count them out of the tournament. They are a team that's got a pro in Jet Howard. They've got an All-American type player in Hunter Dickinson. If Kobe Buffkin continues to play like this, you got 4 quad 1 opportunities left. There is no reason this team can't accumulate a resume here and put themselves in contention for March Madness. Northwestern, the team that had lost to Michigan earlier in the week, bounces back nicely. They get the win at Wisconsin. They finish off a season sweep, at least in the regular season, of the Badgers, and impressed with Northwestern making plays down the stretch, particularly on the defensive end. Trey, Wisconsin is typically the team that figures out a way to win games like this. Northwestern didn't let them do it.
Yeah, now Northwestern is 6-3 in games decided by 5 points or fewer. Last year, they were 5-12. So that's telling of the maturity of this Northwestern team. But, this was the 6th game in 13 days for the Northwestern Wildcats. And I felt like the biggest key for Northwestern was their bench production. They got 18 points out of their bench. Brooks Barnheiser, Martinelli gave them a boost, because when you have to play that many games, I think where it really affects you is late game situations. If all the pressure on both ends of the court are on Boo Buie and Chase Audige to make every single play. But I thought those guys off the bench kind of took a load off of their star perimeter guys so that Boo Buie can make shots down the stretch, so that Chase Audige can make shots down the stretch. And what I was a little bit surprised too with Wisconsin was I felt like in their last meeting in the second half, they were able to get opportunities on the offensive end, running kind of more of their traditional swing stuff. And I thought that they would do that a little bit more to get Tyler Wall going. Tyler Wall shot 2 of 5 from the field, because Northwestern doubles the post on anybody. It could be you, Dave. They'll double the post. And
they'd probably get a turnover.
Maybe I gave away a scouting secret, but they're going to double the post.
It's pretty obvious, yeah.
Yeah, they double the post. Right. It doesn't matter on who it is. And so within the swing offense, it's hard because it's so fast to double the post. And they had a lot of success in their previous meeting by kind of running some of those actions and getting Tyler Wall and Stephen Crowell some opportunities down the paint. But I thought they were a little bit too perimeter-oriented. Chucky Hepburn had a good game, but I think when the ball kind of sticks around the perimeter, it could cause some problems for this Wisconsin offense.
Badgers have now lost 7 of 9. I think the one thing that maybe it isn't getting overlooked in Northwestern season, they have 5 road wins.
Yeah.
Now, 4 of them in the Big Ten. They're the only team that's won in Indiana. They're one of two teams that has won at Michigan State. And you try to put 5 road wins into perspective, maybe it doesn't seem like that much because we're in February. There are only 3 Power 5 teams that have more than 5 road wins. So one of those is Georgetown, and I get it. But the other 4, I mean, it's hard to win on the road in this league, particularly at some of the places they've done it. The issue, and we've talked about this a ton, they have the toughest remaining schedule now in the Big Ten, according to Bart Torvik. They go to Ohio State. That becomes an enormous game for them on Thursday. Speaking of how tough it is to win on the road in the Big Ten, Penn State went to Nebraska and lost. Keisei Tominaga was incredible in this game. Give Nebraska a ton of credit because this is a team that's been so banged up, losing Juwan Gary, losing Emmanuel Bandamel. They have not given up. They gave Illinois everything they could handle early in the week. This is a great win for them, but it's tough for Penn State.
Yeah, and the thing about Penn State, I mean, you got to give Nebraska a ton of credit. I mean, they've continued to play as if they have something to play for. And in a lot of ways you do, because you want to set that foundation, that identity, that culture, even if you don't make a postseason. And Tominaga was absolutely incredible. But I think for Penn State, one of the biggest things is just getting back to their identity on the defensive end. I think when you talked about them last year to end the season, especially the run that they made in the Big Ten tournament, like the one thing that you could say that they could hang their hat on was the defensive end, being gritty, being tough. And to give up 17 assists, 53% from the field against an undermanned Nebraska team, I think that's just telling of kind of where this team is on the defensive end. And I think a lot of times when you have talent, you have guys that can make shots like Andrew Funk. Cam Winter has struggled this year, but another guy that can create off the bounce. You have good three-point shooters. I think sometimes it can take away from the defensive end because you feel like you can make up for it on the offensive end. So I think it's a reality check for this Penn State team. They're kind of at a crossroads of what they want to make it their season. I think the key is being gritty and tough on the defensive end.
Quad 2 loss, so it's not all that damaging in terms of that, but it would have been a quad 2 win if you figure out a way to win it. They have not lost any games outside quads 1 and 2, but they're 5-9 in those quads. 6 quad 1 games left, so still plenty of opportunities for them. But as you see, the Nittany Lions are 5-7, and there it is, Trey. The 6-way tie for third at 7-5. It's total chaos.
Yeah, I mean, all these teams are kind of trending in different directions too. I mean, you got some teams that are kind of up and down. You got a team in Maryland who's won a ton of games in a row. Iowa, you mentioned, won 7-9. So it's just going to be really interesting to see kind of where this plays out because I can't imagine those 6 teams are going to be kind of tied when we get to the end of conference play.
You see the rankings as well. The new rankings are out. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But up next.
Ndidi Opia Massay was a star on the diamond for Northwestern in the late 1980s. She was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year in 1986 and led the conference in batting average in 1989. She was inducted into the Northwestern Athletics Hall of Fame in 2009 for her on-field achievements. Off the field, Opia Massay has been an integral driver of diversity and inclusion in sports. As the Vice President of Workplace Culture and Diversity Initiatives at CBS Sports, she's won several accolades, including the Title IX Trailblazer Award, and she was named to the Sports Illustrated 100 Most Influential Black Women in Sports. Now, Opia Massay has earned her place as a Big Impact Pioneer, Class of 2023.
And we are thrilled to have Ndidi Opia Massay as today's big interview. Ndidi, congratulations on being named a Big Impact Pioneer. What does this honor mean to you?
Thank you so much. I mean, it's incredible because Northwestern and the Big Ten are so prestigious. I mean, there's so many great athletes that have come through that, both Northwestern and the Big Ten. So to be honored, a pioneer and in this space and during Black History Month really means a lot.
You have a fascinating family story. So explain to me how your family went from Nigeria to California.
Yeah. So I was a baby. So I can just share with you, the stories that have been passed on from the family. But my mom, grew up in the U.S. as a U.S. citizen and joined the Peace Corps after college. She was stationed in Nigeria, met my father, married kids, that's kind of history. But in the late 60s in Nigeria, there was a civil war. It's called the Biafra War. And our family lived in Biafra. And Biafra was this area that was fighting to become its own country. Biafra lost. And, we were sort of almost caught behind enemy lines. And we were able, thankfully, to hop on a plane. And then my mom tells a story of, it was the middle of the night. There were no lights. The plane was not allowed to use lights. And we were literally in the plane with the president. It had Biafra become a country, the president. And it was my mom and 3 children, all under the age of 4. And my mom tells us that she grabbed the diaper bag. She had $100 to her name. And we hopped on this flight and we left. And we flew to a safe part of Nigeria and then eventually out of the country. Unfortunately, my dad was not able to join us because he was a Nigerian citizen and was expected to serve in the war. And did not believe in serving. So he actually has his own story where he had to escape and again get to a safe part of the country, and then a few years later meet up with us in California.
That's really remarkable. So you end up in California. You were an outstanding high school athlete, actually 4-sport athlete, but softball was where you really excelled. You went to Northwestern to play softball. You were on some great teams there, including one that made the Women's College World Series. What is your best memory of being a student athlete?
Wow, so many. My teammates, everyone says that, the long-lasting relationships that will never end. My sister on the team. I mean, what could be better? And then my sister and I, our best friend, also from California, was on the team. And at one point, I remember my sister pitching and I was catching, and then our best friend, Sue Phillips, was playing center field, and we sort of looked up the middle and said, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is, besties and sisters who grew up together in the Bay Area, and now we're at Northwestern and we're, competing for a national championship at the College World Series. So definitely teammates. And then, Northwestern is a special place, and, it's a tough place academically. So every time we were pushed academically and athletically, and again, at such a prestigious conference like the Big Ten, it was tough, but looking back, it means so much. It really helped sort of shape who we are and our work ethic, and the fact that we can be truest athletes, student athletes, in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit more. I think sometimes the student athlete experience, kind of the way that it makes you the person that you are, gets overlooked. People talk about the competition aspect of it, but they don't talk about everything else that goes along with it. So you kind of touched on a little bit of it there. I'd love to ask you to dive a little bit deeper into kind of how did it shape you? Like what are the lessons that you learned in that time in Evanston which have helped you in what has become an amazing career?
Yeah, thank you. I think, on the field, the biggest lesson that I learned was teamwork. That in order to be successful, you have to work as a team. That sometimes we beat teams that had more talented individuals. But there's that it factor in the teamwork, where if those who feel a part of it and who were aligned and on the same page with goals and who put the work in together in the trenches, that's teamwork, and that you got your teammates back and that you feel included and you understand your role and you buy into it. So to me, that's what I learned most on the field. And then off the field, I was in Medill, and Medill's always ranked 1 or 2 or 3 in the country. Such a difficult school. I was very intimidated academically walking into Northwestern, and I think I really, number 1, learned how to write well and how to communicate well from Medill. And then number 2, I learned that I can compete in this world, in this media industry. And I got some confidence after a while. It took a minute, but just to learn that I can compete both on the field and off the field at such a high level. And again, it wasn't easy, but at one point I remember thinking about leaving Medill because it was so tough. And I went and spoke to someone in the athletic department, Ken Kraft, who unfortunately, has died, but he became like my second father. And I remember Ken said to me, "Do you want to take the easy way out? because you could get out of Medill. And he said, but here's the deal, you will recognize and honor and really, really understand your Medill degree later in life. And he's right. And regardless, the fact that I'm not a journalist doesn't really matter. I'm in the industry, and Medill is so prestigious. So I'm happy I stayed there, pulled it together, didn't take the easy way out. And again, as Ken told me, people only leave Medill when they're asked to leave Medill. I was not asked to leave Medill, so I clawed my way through, and here I am now in the industry. So it served me well.
You did mention teaming up with your sister, and I think that's a pretty remarkable part of this story. She's incredibly accomplished in her own right, a brilliant physician. But what was it like to have a all-sister battery, right? I mean, she's pitching, you're catching. What's that dynamic like?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. My sister's my best friend. Growing up, we played every sport together. We would complete each other's sentences. We would buy my mom the same Mother's Day card, etc. So we're really on the same wavelength. In fact, she married one of my best friends, Everett Cunningham, who played baseball at Northwestern. He was my year and my friend, and then my sister came a year later. They started to date, and thankfully they're married now. There might have been some problems there with Everett, but it was, listen, it's great because we're definitely on the same wavelength. We have some funny battles too. I remember one time she was shaking me off, and I, basically said, "Time out." I'm like, "I'm the older sister. You pitch what I call, And once again, and then we have Sue Phillips in center field just shaking her head like, "Oh, you too." And even I remember one time I tried to tell her, I'm like, "You come to home plate," and she said, "No, catchers always come to the mound." And I was like, "Okay, halfway." So, only sisters could do that.
You mentioned your time in Medill. You went to Northwestern with the goal of becoming a sports writer, but you decided to go to law school. What made you change course?
Yeah, so in Medill, you have to do a residency, and I did a residency at a local paper. And you really put in there like an entry-level writer coming out of college. And when I was covering obituaries and school board meetings and farmers markets and doing what any entry-level writer does, I just sort of decided that wasn't me and that I wanted to pay my dues in another way. And at that time, I took journalism law, which was a requirement of Medill. And the adjunct professor that we had was a lawyer, and she represented media entities at a big law firm. And I was just fascinated. And I'd never known a lawyer. I'd never thought about law in my entire life, but I love the media and I love the business side of it. And so that really, got me going. That was actually my spring quarter senior year. So it was a little late to take the LSAT. So I worked for a year for a law firm in Chicago as a paralegal. And thought too, I didn't want to just be enamored by one class or one professor. So I thought, let me dive in and see what lawyers really do on a day-to-day basis. And I really liked it. So took the LSAT, went to Notre Dame, and sort of the rest is history.
You have had a lot of careers or a lot of jobs within your career, I should say, that have been related to sports. What's been the most rewarding part of that career?
What I'm doing now is really the most rewarding. I mean, I get to, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's what I'm very passionate about. Being a Black woman, and I'm still a dual citizen, right? I was born in Nigeria, so Nigeria and the US. And in the business room, lots of times I'm the only woman. I'm the only woman of color. So for me, and then sports and media are my passion. So for me, it's making a difference. It's, breaking glass ceilings. It's being the first, most certainly not being the last. And also appreciating those that came before me and just trying to make an impact every day to be more diverse and be more inclusive of everybody. And I think, listen, there's data that shows that diverse teams are more successful, that they have a better bottom line, that they're more creative, more innovative, better problem solving. skills, et cetera. So I really do believe in diversity, equity, inclusion. So now, I get to do it and get paid for it. What could be better?
Ndidi, how do you measure success in that role?
It's tough. I mean, diversity is on the easier side. You can look at numbers. You could look at numbers of people of color, of women, et cetera. On the inclusion and on the culture side, that's a little tougher. There are surveys out there, but to me, I do a lot of listening tours. I talk to a lot of people, and when I see behavioral change, I think that that's success. When I can get somebody, a producer, a director, on-air talent, a decision maker, to really look at content a little differently, or look at stories a little differently, and take a different lens, then I think that that's success. I mean, listen, I think this whole industry has a ways to go, but I absolutely think it's getting better. And I think the fact that we are having these conversations and that we have these full-time jobs that focus on DE&I 24/7, I think is really helpful.
Agreed. I mean, I've been in it at a high level now for 25 years. And at the beginning, we did not have these conversations. So kind of to your point, in real tangible ways, that is success. I am interested in, I think people who don't work in television maybe don't understand how much there is to a television network besides what they see on the air. However, ultimately, that is what people consume. So in what ways do you feel like you have been able to impact the on-air portion of what CBS Sports does?
Yeah, well, listen, it's number one, it's a team. I go back to teamwork. And I have the ability and I guess sort of the honor to work with our teams, our producers, our directors, our features group, our on-air talent. We this past year, created a race and culture unit at CBS Sports. And so I get to work closely with them. And then just collectively, we work with producers, directors, on-air talent, et cetera. So for instance, this month, for Heritage Month, it's Black History Month. So we get the ability to work with our producers and directors and say, hey, what do we have on tap? What kind of story can we show, or what can we share during this Big Ten basketball game? So I will say yesterday we did a game. We did Ohio State at Michigan. And our producers and directors highlighted the first Black basketball player at Michigan and the first Black basketball player at Ohio State. And it was just a little quick 1 or 2 minutes. But just sort of acknowledging Black History Month, acknowledging there was a first, acknowledging that it wasn't easy to be the first, but also acknowledging that person opened up the doors for everyone else. So those stories, as well as, some longer features, I think is a really good start.
Ndidi, I'll leave you with this. You still have a lot of time left in your career, so I don't want to in any way make this any kind of a postscript, but what do you hope that people who are in school now or just beginning their careers might learn from your experiences?
Well, I would say those that are in journalism school or think they want to have a career in media, I would say that you don't always have to be on air, or you don't have to be a producer or a director or a camera operator, that there's so many other ways to influence content. And almost like you said, shaping content in roles like mine. And then I would also encourage people to think out of the box. That was one thing that I did early on, and I continue to do. The roles are not as hard. I mean, they're a little bit more difficult to find, but for me, they're worth it, because then you can really follow your passion that may not be in a box. So I would say learn about all the different roles there are, very specifically in media. Think out of the box, and honestly, go for it.
Pretty good advice. Ndidi, Opia, Massay, this was a ton of fun. Thank you so much. Congratulations on this honor, and thanks for spending a little time with us.
Thank you for having me.